My role here today is as co-moderator for the first panel discussion, that being Digitalization, the Multi-Stakeholder Approach. Hot off the press from the Digital 2021, the State of the Internet report, are these statistics. Social media users have grown at the fastest rate in 3 years to 4.2 billion, up 13% year on year. We now spend 42% of our waking time online, with the average internet user clocking up almost 7 hours a day on the web. 5.22 billion people use a mobile phone. 77% of internet users indicate that they buy something online. And older age groups are the fastest growing segments among some of the top social platforms, Facebook, Twitter, etc. What does this have to do with digitalization? The growing use of digital devices has heightened the demand and the need for digitalization. My name is Rabindra Jaggernauth. I am a director of the TTMAG, Trinidad and Tobago Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group, and I actually have the pleasure in carrying you through the first panel discussion, Digitalization, the Multi-Stakeholder Approach. Co-moderating with me is Sanjay Bahadur Singh. Sanjay is also a director of TTMAG, and our panelists, Peter Davis, Maria Daniels, and Sean Rocke, whom I will introduce in a short while. What is digitalization? Digitalization is the use of digital technologies to change a business model and provide new revenue and value producing opportunities. It is a process of moving to a digital business. Digital technology has revolutionized almost every aspect of people's life, as said by the minister, as said by the previous speakers. Office work, shopping, music, movies, television, photography, travel, transport, long distance communication are just some areas that are being transformed. In Trinidad, like many parts of the world, the COVID era has resulted in an acceleration of digitalization. We are forced to use digital technologies for areas such as education, healthcare, commerce. But are we benefiting sufficiently? For example, across the public sector, there are various forms of digital transformation taking place at different stages of progress. Part of the driver for this is that the citizens now expect a level of service akin to what they receive from private companies. Speed, usability, availability, and reliability are key. In the private sector, companies are looking for innovative ways to use technology to improve their processes. The internet, a catalyst or facilitator of digitalization, is open, distributed, interconnected, and transnational. In the internet area, as in other areas, the multi-stakeholder approach is widely accepted as the optimal way to make policy decisions for a globally distributed network. One of the current challenges in taking forward a vision for digitization of Trinidad and Tobago is understanding where and how to engage with a range of different multi-stakeholder processes and policy-making efforts currently underway. Given the growing importance of the digital economy and the ever-expanding technology landscape, there has been a proliferation of efforts that have the potential to shape policies, governance models, and infrastructure investment priorities. But it is often difficult for many stakeholders in the public and private sectors to identify and focus on these processes with the highest potential for transformative impact. Which brings us to our first panel discussion, digitalization, the multi-stakeholder approach. We have someone on the panel representing the private sector, someone representing the public sector, and someone who can provide a developed country perspective. And in this regard, and largely because I've said too much already, we will just move on to the panel and give each panelist just about 5 minutes, really, to talk to the topic, and thereafter we throw it open for question and answers. First of all, I would actually call on Peter Davis. I have the good fortune of having connections with all of the panelists in some form or fashion. Peter is the principal of Peter Davis and Associates, a management consulting firm specializing in IT governance, security, and audit. And I should say a management consulting firm in domicile in Toronto, Canada. Prior to founding PDA, Mr. Davis' private sector experience included stints with two large Canadian banks and a manufacturing company. He was formerly a principal in the information systems audit practice of Ernst & Young. In the public sector, Mr. Davis was a director of information systems audit in the office of the provincial auditor in Ontario, where he had oversight audit responsibilities for all Ontario Crown corporations, agencies, and boards. A 30-year information technology governance, audit, and security veteran, Mr. Davis' career includes positions as consultant, security administrator, security planner, and information systems auditor. And it's interesting to note that Mr. Davis, despite his long-standing, let's say, foray into information technology and management consulting, is currently pursuing an LLM degree at the University of Toronto, a very ambitious person. So, Peter, let's hear from you some introductory remarks, and then we'll hear from the other speakers, and then we'll throw it out really for questions and from the wider audience. So, Peter, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Danny, and thanks everybody for having me speak. Normally, when I've gone down and done some work in Trinidad, it's never in the winter. Now I get an opportunity in the winter, and I can't go to Trinidad. So, how's that working out for me? I just wanted to bring up some issues to talk about that you people should consider for the next 2 days as you're attending this conference. So let's just set some context. We heard Herr Kumar give us some history around the internet, but think about the genesis of it and how the internet sort of evolved, like the way the coral grows. It builds upon itself until it becomes too brittle and breaks off. And so now we're trying to go back and retrofit something to something that's sort of grown organically over time. And that's not always easy. I'm sure you've heard the expression that the only reason God could create the world in 6 days was that there was no installed base. So we're dealing now with installed base that we have to go back and try to retrofit. The other term that we've sort of thrown in here is this concept of multi-stakeholder. So first we have to identify all the stakeholders and then determine what would be their input into this process. So, I don't envision that we all stand around in a circle holding hands and sing Kumbaya. The world just doesn't work that way, but hopefully we can come to some meeting of the minds. Danny mentioned a very good paper from the Internet Society, and if you haven't read the one about the multi-stakeholder, I suggest that you do read it. In there, though, it talks about 3 pillars or 3 components, and I hope that in the next 2 days, and even in this session, that we have an opportunity to talk about the 3 components. There will be somebody probably talking about the cultural part of this, which is very important, and that's really the human aspect, that you have to develop your own talent, and you have to educate the people with respect to digital concepts and how to do digital. But the hardest part is the digital culture, developing the digital culture. And as WAG many years ago said, that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So, it's not an easy thing to develop that culture. The next thing that I'm reminded of is part of it, and it was emphasized to me this morning, was this concept that we have to build out the infrastructure. And I don't know if the rest of you saw it, but up on my screen, it popped up that the first speaker was suffering from low bandwidth. And so if you want to develop a digital society, then you have to build out the infrastructure. I was shocked the other day to see that the US's implementation of 5G, the rollout that they are proposing, has less capacity than our 4G or LTE in Canada. Because I would have thought they were light years ahead of us, because they keep telling us that they're the best country in the world. But at least in this aspect, Canada is outshining the US. The next component that you need to think about is the whole concept of the governance. You need to build that ecosystem to be able to support, the initiatives that we're talking about. And that is not easy to build out that decentralized governance institutions within your country, and then how your country will interact with other countries. So last thing, I think I have a few moments left. The challenges that I see that you need to address in the next 2 days, and we could address it starting with this session, are, first off, we have to look at nationalism. So between your country and my country, we've seen a lot of nationalism going on for the last 4 years. And we saw something in Canada this week we found very disturbing, where the US is engaging in nationalism again, and they're killing off the what's called the Keystone Pipeline. Now, it's not a lot of jobs, but still, it was done unilaterally by the United States and is affecting the economy of Canada. We even see that companies like AWS, Amazon Web Services, is taking the government, the US government, to task because they awarded a contract to Microsoft, which was a very big contract of $10 billion. And their argument is, I'm going to read this, that it was flawed and politically corrupted decision. So if people are making decisions that are politically flawed or incorrect. The next thing that I think you should think about as we go through these 2 days is the 26 words that created the internet. And so in the United States, there's something called the Communications Decency Act, and Section 230 specifies those 26 words. And if you haven't seen the 26 words, then I suggest you look at them and think about what they mean. The next thing I'd like to talk about, or we should talk about, is this concept of net neutrality. Now, Canada has something that we have called the CRTC, which we use to regulate telecommunications in Canada. And in there, it specifically says that we will be net neutral. Whereas the United States talk about it, they beat their chest, but then we see that they're going to do things that are not net neutral. Now, in some ways, I'm sort of on side with them, because I think if somebody wants to spam me, then they should have a lower priority when sending me email than my sister Nancy in Vancouver, right? So I think there should maybe be some sort of tariffs applied. But again, that could affect commerce. We need to think about it. The bigger question, I think, that nobody really wants to address are things like Facebook and the rest of the FANG. I don't know if you know that term, FANG, which is Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, which everybody seems to be going after these days. Is this concept of some of these a public good? Are they serving a public good? And if they are a public good, then common law in your country and mine and all the common law countries states that there is this concept of eminent domain, which means that somebody could come along, a government could come along and basically take them over. Another thing we have to consider is censorship. So we're seeing a lot of that, especially around all the trolling and the propaganda and everything that's been going on for the last 4 years. But it's been going on a lot longer than that, because, we even saw that Google put out a paper that I think it was last October, that they did their own analysis and found out that 64% of the people who joined extremist right-wing groups in Facebook were actually recommended to do so by Facebook. So consider that. So somebody's on doing something at Facebook, and they're obviously leaning to the right. So Facebook pops up with something and says, "Oh, you might want to join QAnon." So then somebody joins QAnon, and then when they're on QAnon, it might be, "Oh, you might want to join Proud Boys." So they're getting sucked into it by the platform itself. So where do we start and where do we end with this concept of censorship? The last thing I just want to briefly talk about is this concept of privacy. So countries around the world need to decide whether we're going to deal with privacy with respect to property laws, or we're going to talk about privacy with respect to liability laws. The Americans have decided that they're going to deal with it with respect to liability. So if your information is breached, your personal information is breached, then you might be able to sue to recover some loss. Whereas a lot of other countries are considering, no, we should be using property rights like we would use intellectual property. So I own the property, I own my personal data, and I can sell it to you. But it's a difficult concept to deal with, and it's not an easy solution, because we go from one extreme where we have no privacy to the other extreme where we have very strict privacy. And if we have no privacy in place, then what happens is people don't tend to offer data. So think about Facebook. If people said, well, I'm not going to post anything to Facebook, then what value does Facebook have? On the other hand, Facebook wants to use that information to sell you information or to provide that information to other people. So somewhere in between there, we're sort of in this, Goldilocks and the Three Bears situation, where we just need to find what's right. And again, what's right is what serves the individual as well as the better, the society at large. So I think I've given you some things to think about in the 2 days, and maybe some thoughts for questions.
Good, Peter, and you've given our panel and yourself some things to think about, because when we have questions and answers, certainly during the Q&A session, some of these things will come back up again, and we look forward to you further ventilating on these items. Our second panelist, Maria Daniel. Maria is a partner in the strategy and transaction practice at Ernst & Young, based in the Trinidad office. She has led several high-profile engagements and has provided clients with advice on raising both debt and equity capital, as well as strategic options analysis towards maximizing shareholder value. She specializes in business valuations, transaction support services on both the buy side and sell side of the transaction, mergers, acquisitions, and divestitures, independent business review, receiverships, restructuring, strategic advisory services, including digital transformation and turnaround advisory. Maria is a chartered financial analyst, holds an FCCA designation, and a BSc in Economics and Management from the University of the West Indies. Maria is also a licensed trustee under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act of Trinidad and Tobago, and has worked in several different sectors across the Caribbean, not limited to fintech solutions, strategic advisory services, evaluation services, IFRS 9 implementation, receiverships, and also assurance support. She also works with entrepreneurs to develop business plans and models for new expansion projects. And recently, she has been focusing on developing digital strategies for clients. Maria, can we hear a few introductory remarks from you?
Morning, everyone. So, change really only occurs when remaining the same is more painful than the change itself. And we've seen that with COVID-19. But when I think about, all the discussions we're having and listening to our initial speakers, we tend to focus on the nitty-gritty when we talk about multi-stakeholder. And everybody has a role, everybody has to play that role. But what is that role all coming together to achieve? So when I talk about digitization and I talk about digital strategy with my clients and I talk about transformation, let us understand that digitization is an enabler. You first have to have a vision. You first have to have, what am I trying to achieve by going digital? I see a lot of people doing digital things. They have an app, they have an online application, but end to end, they are not digital. So I have many people going on my online store, but I haven't changed my supply logistics in order to deliver my products. So when we're talking about multi-stakeholder, and we can look at the macro view, what are we all trying to achieve? What do we see as a digital nation? How is our education going to change? How is the workforce going to change? What are the skills that we really need? Now, unless we have one big vision that we're all working towards, we can have every stakeholder doing something. We get everybody playing their part. But what if their part is not sharing the same vision or the same strategy? Then what we're going to have instead is a multi-stakeholder chaos. So I think what we need to think about when we're talking about multi-stakeholder, we first have to start with, what are we all trying to achieve? Where are we seeing this going? And then who are all the parties that need to play and be accountable, a word that, does not really work in Trinidad sometimes, accountable for your part. So I would like us to really discuss and look at, the broader picture of this is where we want to go. Most of the technology we're talking about today, and I'm sure Peter could attest to this, didn't just exist 1 year ago, right? Everybody, the minister spoke about Estonia. Estonia took this leap 20 years ago, 2 decades. They started to visualize that they wanted to be a digital leader, and they put everything in place to get there. So when we're talking about multi-stakeholder, and I will bring that down even to the corporate organization, your IT people cannot decide we're going digital and there will be success. Your business people have to sit, your customer serving, your supply logistics, your IT, all have to work together towards how are we using digital to differentiate ourselves? How are we using digital to execute our strategy? But we first must understand what is the strategy. So I think when we start speaking about multi-stakeholder, it cannot be multi-stakeholder in your own little silo. So more and more of businesses want to see the return on investment from we could buy all the laptops in the world, but if people don't know how to use them, then it's going to be wasted money. We could, when we think about, where this could go and really using digital to maximize value, it can go very far. But each person have to understand what are we trying to achieve. I did computer science. I wouldn't say how long ago, but very long ago. So much so, it was probably in the first 2 years that computer science was actually offered in our schools at an O and A level. And I'm listening to my daughter who is now doing it in Form 5. And it's exactly the same thing I learned 20 years ago. Well, more than 20. But that can't be right. So here we are talking about a digital nation, but our education and our curriculum is not changing for how the world is changing. So I want us to think about not only us, being multi-stakeholder, but multi-stakeholder working towards one vision, one strategy, with accountability for each of the levers and responsibility being clearly understood by all parties. Otherwise, we are going to have chaos and we are going to have levers that are not moving together to the bigger whole. So I'm looking forward to the discussion. And I love the panel because, as you said, Danny, we have a wide cross-section here of these multi-stakeholders.
You have a wide cross-section, you're right, and we have a lot to do, basically, to create the framework and foundation for the discussions over the next 2 days. Thank you very much, Maria. Our next panelist is Dr. Sean Rocke. Sean is the chairman of iGovTT, so certainly qualified to actually talk on this panel. He's a distinguished lecturer at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus in electrical and computer engineering. He has co-authored numerous articles for various publications, including books, engineering journals, such as the Western Journal of Engineering, presentations and workshops at conferences, both regionally and internationally. His career started in teaching mathematics, physics, and being the network administrator at a local college. He subsequently embarked on his academic pursuits that led him to complete his BSc in electrical and computer engineering at UE, graduating at the top of the cohort within the faculty. His keen interest in information and communication technologies led him to read for a master's in communication management with a focus on government policy and management of ICT implementation in the UK, and then a PhD in electrical and computer engineering in the US, focusing on next generation spectrum management for emerging wireless technologies. Throughout his academic pursuits, Dr. Rocke has been the recipient of numerous scholarships and awards earned by his exemplary work. He's a member of and has been a reviewer of various publications for the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, IEEE, and he's also a member of IEEE Communications Society, the ACM Association of Computing Machinery, and has been a motivational speaker for the Heroes Foundation. Sean, can we hear a few words from you before we get into the Q&A session?
It's on mute. You're on.
Okay, Sean, you're on mute.
Sean, you need to unmute.
I'm sorry.
Number
I'm
one
sorry.
sentence.
I'm very sorry. Thanks again, Danny, for that. I thought it was unmuted, but there's a delay in the software on my very aged platform. But never mind that. Thanks again for the invitation and the opportunity to speak. I listened very well to all the contributions that everybody has made so far on this panel, as well as in the welcome address and the address by the minister. And I have to say that first, I wholeheartedly agree with everything that has been said. So I'm going to keep what I have to say particularly short and focus on a niche area and only sort of be devil's advocate in a sense based on some of the things that have been said. Not that I agree or disagree, but just for the sake of discussion. So I listened to one thing that was said by the Honorable Minister, and she said, we need everybody, we need you all. And I think that is one of the basic tenets of the multi-stakeholder approach. It has to be about having a seat at the table. But I want to balance that with pragmatism, as what was already said by the esteemed other colleagues on the panel. Because in order for something to succeed sometimes, yes, everybody should have a seat at the table, I agree. There's an issue of equity and fairness that we need to discuss that comes with the definition of the roles, the definition of that shared goal, that definition of what is it that the particular stakeholders are interested in affecting and are affected by for the shared process, the shared destiny that arises, that they are trying to work towards accomplishing a particular goal. And I put forward that I'd want to extend the analogy of there's a seat at the dinner table. I'd want to suggest that there's a seat in the kitchen as well, or a place in the kitchen as well, because the dinner table is more about benefiting from the many things that are going on, but having not the opportunity to participate in the joys and the interaction and the community building and so on that goes on in the kitchen to prepare the meal, the hard work and the effort. I can understand why it is that sometimes people often feel marginalized or they question what their role is. And if any of you have ever been in a sort of a family gathering, I like to draw on personal experiences in making the points. If you've ever been in a family gathering, particularly in a cramped kitchen, the coordination and understanding what dish you're doing, what dishes are being made, etc., is very important. So it comes back to the point that the panelists made with respect to defining your roles. Now, in addition to this, sometimes there's a bit of give and take. So you also hear a lot of times with multi-stakeholder approaches about not being listened to. There is no need, and I think it was Peter who said it, there's no need for consensus. There's need for a general agreement. So my question to you is, when you're thinking about the activities for the next few days, what are you prepared to agree upon, and what are you prepared to negotiate, and what are you prepared to put to the side? Because maybe it's not possible to get everything you want when you are trying to achieve some common goal. Your common goal might be just 1% of the thing that you're doing. And I think this is a problem that is faced across the board. Now, another area that hasn't, outside of what the honorable minister had said, that hasn't really been talked about much, and sometimes I would say people get the perception that the public sector is a little bit slow to move. And I think a lot of it has to do with awareness. And I believe that I don't want to confuse awareness with transparency. I want to talk about awareness in the point of view of being able, and I think Maria said it as well, accountability. What are we responsible for? What are we doing? Why are we doing it? A lot of the times it's work in progress. Danny, you said it. You said that you recognize there were a lot of things that are going on. The question sometimes is, do people know? How can they be part of the process? I think as well that Maria mentioned the issue of now that you have some understanding of what you're doing, then how are you going to, as a group of stakeholders, sort of move forward? And that is also part of the equation. Now, in giving and in accepting that you may not always agree, you may have to deal with structural changes and issues of governance. I think that is particularly important when one thinks about the role that the public sector plays in the multi-stakeholder process. Sometimes there's the role of the problem solver, the role of the facilitator, the role of the I want to separate that in terms of the legislative, the economic, and so on, the things that only they can really drive based on how the systems and the institutions are set up. And when you think about it, and hopefully over the next few days, I want us to really consider that in many instances, the difficulty or the conflicts that arise that impede the multi-stakeholder process generally derive from something that one or many stakeholders may not necessarily understand or appreciate about something else that another stakeholder might be doing. Now, with that in mind, I think those were just some little points to plug in to what has been said already, and I just wanted to throw that out. So I'd hand back over to you, Danny, at this point, and I welcome any questions and the discussion to pursue.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter, Maria, Sean. Multi-stakeholderism is a word that I came across. If you look to write it, it will take half your line. So that's what we're all talking about. And let's have the let's have people see who Sanjay is. Sanjay is co-moderating the session, and Sanjay is monitoring the chat room for questions from participants so that we can bring it to the panel. So we have the panel now, and we're moving straight into the questions and answer sessions. And a lot of good things have been said. In fact, it's exactly what we wanted from the three panelists. You've opened out the topic in such a way that it's actually going to engage a lot of discussion with participants and among yourselves. So let me just, well, if you can spotlight the panelists. To all the panelists, let me just kick off a question. And Sanjay, when I'll call on you at the appropriate time to actually bring forward the questions from the chat room.
Sure, no
but to all the panelists, and here's Sanjay.
Thanks, Danny.
Sanjay is our co-moderator. Sanjay, want to just introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. Sanjay Bahadur Singh. Nice to be on this panel with those panelists. I look forward to your questions. As Danny mentioned, I'll be monitoring the chat, and should you have any comments or question, feel free to direct, and I will ensure that is channeled to our panelists. Thank you.
Great. So for all the panelists, do you think that a multi-stakeholder approach is essential to successful digitalization? And if so, why? Very broad question, but it gives you an opportunity to talk about the whole issue. Peter?
You want me to go first?
Well, I'm seeing you on the screen.
I think any time that you're trying to pull people along, then it needs a multi-stakeholder approach. You need to get people involved. As I said a little bit earlier, I think the most difficult thing is identifying the people that need to be involved. And they're not always evident. And some people we think should be involved shouldn't be, and others we don't get involved should be. You know, to me, this concept of multi-stakeholder approach, it's like we're pretending that it's a new thing, but this has been around since time memoriam. There's nothing new here. We just need to talk to people and get their input like we would in anything. Like we had the Minister Weston earlier. I'm sure when they go out to talk about developing laws, they reach out to people to get input. And I think that's the same thing that's required here.
Great. Maria, you were talking about multi-stakeholderism really at a micro level. Peter was talking about it at a macro level. Tell us what you feel in terms of the multi-stakeholder approach is essential to the success of digitalization.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, that's a no-brainer, right? So I'm not going to say yeah or nay, that's a given. I think what we have to look at it from is, again, going back to what end, right? What are we all trying to achieve? And I'm just looking at the chat here, and there's a comment or question. And I think this has been why we have failed in moving forward. And somebody was asking, if multi-stakeholderism is pursued, how is intellectual property individually identified? And why I'm saying this has been the root cause of us moving forward is we always seem to go back to what is it in for me, not what is the bigger picture. Everybody wants to be the star. So the young people might not remember, and why I'm going into this is because we are in a small economy. A small economy means that we can't have 10 people doing the same thing. So when Sean mentioned that we also have to understand how's our role, and Peter just said it, who needs to be there? Who is the best in that role? If we have 10 people that could do the same thing, and how do we all understand what we're trying to achieve? When we do team building exercises sometime, we give a team and each person has a part that they need to draw. And it never ends up being what the whole is supposed to look like, because no one knows what the other one is supposed to be doing. And no one understands what we're all trying to achieve. It's the same thing here. So I think we need to get out of this individualism for multi-stakeholder to really be a success. Because we're saying, yeah, we're all working together, but we're all working together for what is best for me, but not what is best for the overall objective. So I'll hand it over to Sean there.
All right. Danny, I think we need to shift the order of this, because I have to agree with everything that is being said already. What I would say is, as Maria said, is a no-brainer. Yes, multi-stakeholder. Another analogy, if you permit me to, think about the human body. We can't survive if any of the organs or the essential organs are missing, can we? There are some we can survive without, but they do play a role. But again, the whole point of the human body, the medical doctors may not agree with me. It's really to keep the brain moving, but the brain can't do anything without the rest of the parts, generally, right? So this is where we talk about that issue of, your thinking, your intellectual exercise, as it relates to, as has already been said, what is in it for me? Why am I in this? What do I stand to benefit? And in answering that, as Maria also mentioned, and Peter also mentioned, you really need to think about what is the common goal. You can't think about everything in the bucket. You have to think about the drops that relate to you. I don't want to go into a mathematical visualization with Venn diagrams, but you don't always have overlapping interests. So it's really key to focus on what is important in that respect. And to sort of throw something else out there, in terms of an experience over the last 2 years, and the minister would have mentioned it. I don't know how many of you were familiar with the HackTT exercise that came out. It was really about a collaboration, or I would say multi-stakeholder engagement involving members of the public sector, the ICT community, private sector, particularly in terms of crafting the terms of reference and in mentoring the next generation tertiary level institutions. And between you and me, I really wanted secondary school as well in it, and maybe even primary school, but it was a pilot. Also, government ministries, divisions, and agencies were involved because they had the problems. It was about a year. It took about a year and change just to dialogue, to understand what are the things the different actors want to get out of it. And maybe not all actors were included in that pilot, but the success to me was in the fact that the students got mentorship. The government agencies got proofs of concept on digital services, and Maria pointed to the bigger picture in terms of why, but getting to that, the activities like this could funnel into that sort of activity. At the end of the activity, the students were recognized. The students had their intellectual efforts rewarded and showcased. They are currently being piloted to different degrees within the different recipient ministries, divisions, and agencies. The minister referred to employee TT. That was one of the things that was looked at. Additionally, there was benefit, I believe, I stand to be corrected, but in terms of the initial discussions, a lot of the mentors from the private sector, it isn't only about, corporate social responsibility and waking up feeling nice in the morning. They got the hidden CVs of these students. They got to see what they really could do. They got to see that there are opportunities to draw on these students, maybe by interfacing with academia to solve some of their own problems through those sort of collaborations. And I think that's something that you see a lot in many developed countries, and I wish that we could see a little bit more of that in our part of the world as well. So Danny, I'll just hand you back over with that, but I think that's what it really sits at to me in terms of what's the recipe for success.
And following on to what you're saying, we have to not only look at the dark side of digitalization, we have to look at the positives, because there are tremendous positives. There are a lot of dark sides, yes, but those things can be manageable. And of course, they are better manageable if a multitude of people come together to manage them, rather than leaving it up to one individual as such.
Danny,
Sanjay,
if I may. Danny,
okay.
if I may. Sorry for interrupting you, Danny. Good morning.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to say that I'm listening to the conversation, and I've listened to the same conversation for the last 20 years. The thing is, talking about we are the ones to do it,
Of course.
We are the drivers, but I keep coming to the same conversations all the time. And Dr. Rocke is saying he's sitting in a very crucial position. It is not about agreeing what everybody else is saying. We are the one who have to drive it. And to coin both Danny and George's mantra for the last 20 years, we have to have a champion. But who is the champion? Who will it be? Will it be Danny? Will it be George? Will it be Dr. Rocke? Who will it be? It's not somebody else's responsibility. It's our responsibility. And I'm saying our because I include myself in that, because I've been involved in this for the longest while. We having these same conversations over and over again. As somebody new comes into the picture, we start over the conversation.
Yep.
We are asking non-IT people to champion our cause, and it's not going to work. We have to champion our own cause. What is iGov doing to further IT in the country? We still don't have IT in Togo in a meaningful way. We still have pockets of internet in Los Bajos and those places. In the last 20, 30 years, we're doing this thing. So, good conversation, but let's take it a step further.
I agree.
Totally agree. And yes, I have been a player in this sphere and trying to get greater uptake in what we now call digitalization for the better part of 3 decades. Let's following on that point, before we take some questions through Sanjay. Peter, the issue of champion, is there a champion, or is there an entity that we can actually identify as a champion for digitalization in Canada?
Well, that's a tough question.
I
would say that the answer I would have given is I think the government has to lead this. Okay?
Yep.
And the reason I'm going to give that bad answer is because in Canada, where we see the government help this concept of digitalization is through the programs that it has in place. So one that's very popular is one called the SRED credits, and that stands for Scientific Research and Experimental Development. Now, it's a tax credit, which means you have to have some revenue, but at least it gives relief to small companies to do innovation. Right? And we also have other tax benefits. So whether you capitalize something or operationalize it when it comes to expenses also has some impact. We're also trying to set up more, we have an organization called the BDC, which specifically lends money to small, innovative companies. Right? So you need to free up capital to support the small innovative companies. And I think that has to come through, through regulations, legislation, and government, because we can't do it as a company. But can I just say one thing before I move on? I want to go back because it's hidden in that question, and I just wanted to point out and say that what Maria and Daniel said was absolutely correct. I mean, you have to alter your vision before you try to reconfigure your business model. So this is true at a macro level, at the government level, as well as at the organizational level. You know, about 30 years ago, I saw a vice president from the Toronto Dominion Bank do a presentation, and he used the term that I've used ever since because I thought it was brilliant. And it goes to what Maria was saying. He used the term electronic verite. So what he meant by that is you can cover over your lousy old processes and your lousy old company using shiny new technology, but it's still the lousy old processes, right? So you probably heard the expression and lipstick on a pig, rearranging the chairs on the Titanic, paving over cow pastures. It's all the same thing. Unless you actually re-engineer something and do something differently, then all you're going to do is the things you do now faster, and that might be more disastrous for your organization.
And that's a big difference between automation and transformation, is what Peter's talking about there. Transformation is about completely changing the way that you do things. And, you know, I get frustrated as well the same way. We're having the same discussions for the last 20 years. The minister talked about building a culture. And I tell many of the CEOs I work with, they say, oh, help us create our culture. Help us write a culture statement. You don't write a culture statement. You act a culture. You lead a culture. And I think we get too much into, you know, democracy is a good and a bad thing. I think somebody said it earlier. We don't need consensus. We need to agree that this is the best way to go. And the leaders need to lead that charge. And I'll give some other examples globally. So in Nigeria, which we know have a lot of issues with corruption, it was their central bank that took the lead on a cashless society. They forced the banks to change their technology. They incentivize people not to use cash. That's how you drive real change. Somebody on the top has to say, guess what? This is just how we're going to do it. We don't want SEA no more. This is how it's going to be done. We're going to give everybody the best teachers because we can now digitally offer that to all schools. But somebody has to take the mantle and say, this is what is best. Get all the stakeholders who need to be there involved and then just do. That's our whole problem. We talk, but we don't do.
And in fact, it's a pity I'm just a moderator because this is such a sore point that has been festering for 2-3 decades with me and with IT in small little Trinidad and Tobago. But I see that Albert Daniel has his hands up. Let's get a quick statement from Albert and then move on to some questions through Sanjay. Albert?
Thank you very much, Chair. Well, first of all, would like to congratulate the TTMAG on executing this very important forum, the TTIGF 2021, because in this day and age, having these kinds of discussions will play an important part in ensuring that developments move into the direction that they need to. Now, in ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, we are based on the multi-stakeholder model. We have spaces for business, government, end users, technical community, and country code managers, and so on. So all of the policy that is developed within ICANN for Internet is actually based on the multi-stakeholder model. And I have to say that what I've seen is that Trinidad and Tobago has been very effective in playing their part in all of these different stakeholder groups. So, but what we are seeing now is a little bit of a change, which is why I like Sean's analogy of having a seat at the table vis-a-vis having a seat in the kitchen. Because it's one thing to be at the table, but if you're not active in making inputs, in stating concerns, then that seat at the table is not really effective. What we are seeing now is while there used to be good participation in the past, that seems to be falling off a bit. Trinidad still has seats, you know, with regard to government, end users, technical community, and so on. But the people who have been working hard, some of them are at this TTIGF, are suffering from burnout. So my question to the panel is, how do you deal with that issue of sustaining enthusiasm for participation in the multi-stakeholder model? Thank you.
Good. So, panelists, anybody
Sean,
feel
get
free
him
to
to
jump
go
in.
first.
Yeah, I was gearing up to
Sean can
go.
go
I was
first.
gearing up to go because I also wanted to kind of I wanted to answer it, but I wanted to add to the discussion before, in a sense, because it sort of fits in with what I'm about to say. So in terms of and this is something from my academic seat that I tend to look at a lot, and I can't remember who said it earlier, but it has to do with a sense of national service. It has to do with a sense of understanding what are the things you want to derive benefit from. Before COVID, I was probably clocking about 140 hours a week working, of which 100 or so were online. There are 168 hours in the week for those who don't know. So I can't claim that I suffer from pandemic fatigue and burnout because it's always been like that. But especially now, I think where a lot of people are getting into the digitalization artificially accelerated because of everything in front of us and all of the other issues, the human issues associated with it. What helps me, to be very honest, especially in teams, is the cliched team building, the taking us a little lunch meeting, a little time to just have a dialogue. Sometimes one of the biggest issues I have encountered working with teams, especially in a multi-stakeholder type of arrangement, is that there's a drift in awareness of what is going on with the different agents. And usually when you're knee deep in the execution of something, or even in the dialogue leading towards planning for the execution, it's always good to establish proper lines of communication and to really maintain those lines of communication. You can't be so busy that you're unable to share information with each other, because that communication channel is essential to the process. And with that in mind, I just want to just go back a little bit. With respect to the question that the comment that John had made earlier, I do agree that there needs to be a champion. The question of who is the champion, sometimes we lump everybody into the same bucket. And that's why I say we need to clarify the rules. And the thing about transformation is it's less revolution and more evolution. So things change. For example, does anybody think that what is the rule that, let's say, a certain random state enterprise responsible with the mandate for advising government on matters of ICT, what is the role that they should take in this day and age compared to what it was 10 years ago? Those are the kinds of discussions that need to be had. Those are the things that determine what you can and cannot do. I think that because of the need for awareness, and I take it upon myself that is something that I as well need to do more of. We need to be more aware of what is going on. Work in progress can't remain hidden, for one. But also, what are we required to do? What are we being asked to do? Sometimes, for the sake of the greater good, another term that has been used, you step outside of your bounds and the lines become blurred. And sometimes it happens so many times that you tend to lose your roles. So again, that comes back to issues of governance, which comes back to the question of who is the champion and what are the roles of the different people in the kitchen and at the table.
And
But can I just
support your statement? To support the statement, hold on, John. We've got to give a lot of people opportunities to talk. To support the statement, Sean, we have to learn from our history in IT advocacy rather than seeking to redo. And every time we have somebody who is the de facto champion, that person seeks to redo all that has been done in the past, and we don't seem to move forward enough. But Sanjay,
Yes,
you to the chat room, some
thank you.
questions for the panel.
There's been a lot of chat relating to education. They've been talking a lot about the multi-stakeholder process. There are a few comments here that I'm going to go into, but before I get to that, there's this is a YouTube question, and I'm going to throw it out. It hasn't been directed to any one of our panelists, but what has been the biggest challenge in rolling out e-governance? That's an open question to the panel.
I could start.
Okay, Sean?
I would say no. I would say clarification of roles in one respect, um, resourcing in another respect. I think that has a significant part to play. Sometimes you're bound. As a simple example, there was a recent committee meeting, I mean recent over the last 12 months or so, whereby one of the particular challenges that is faced is the issues of people and resourcing. What can you do to make sure that you are properly equipped with and are able to retain those individuals or those groups that can assist you or that can encourage the transformation that you need to do? And this is why when you look not when you know you hear these things, I've been hearing it myself, not for 20 years like Danny, but definitely for some time. You know, you hear the same arguments as John as well pointed out. You hear the same comments, and what is different? And it's unfortunate. And I'll push this analogy to you. Sometimes it's not for lack of doing. Imagine you had a building. This is a nice building. You've done your part to build it. It's a little bit expensive, but you want to now sell it to somebody. And because of the expense associated with the building, you need to go through some processes to allow the bank to finance it for potential clients. Let's just say, right? Now, when you go and you do that, there are some processes to do that. And sometimes we know that those take a long time. Yeah. Let's say, for instance, those processes are sorted out and let's say through digitalization, you can do a lot of those things. Even so, let's say somebody moves into the building, there's the issue of maintenance, especially in the realm of ICT, things change. So while we might have been in a position, let's say, where we might have had a certain standing at a certain point on the timeline, over time, that's going to change because technology changes, things change, we need to evolve. So I think sometimes that is the thing that we need to look at as to why is it that we feel and we observe from what we see and hear and taste and touch and smell that we are seemingly in the same position every time. I don't think that we necessarily are in the same position every time. I think that what happens is that we we do move sometimes, but things need to be maintained and effort needs to be put on ensuring that we maintain that level of status as well.
Sean, I want to go one step further. I want to probe you a little more. I believe I could do that. Right, Danny, with your permission, of course.
Sure.
Sean, judging from the comments that we've seen here and your response to that question, for the benefit of everyone here, would you be in a position to help bring some clarity to the role that iGovTT has in this transformation, if any?
Certainly, I can do that, and I'll try to do it in just 2 or 3 sentences if possible. First of all, given the mandates that are put on us, based on the current governance structures, the company essentially is tasked as it relates to certain matters of ICT to help those in the ministries, divisions, and agencies who can, as well as those who may not be necessarily equipped to do so. And what do I mean by that? We are here to help with the government through advising on matters of standardization and interoperability, for instance, for helping to put those frameworks in place. Another thing that the company looks at as well from an operational perspective has to do with the building blocks that would allow you to effect a lot of these digital services. So the underlying infrastructure, the various building block services. We've moved a little bit more into rolling out certain services such as government payment solutions to assist in the development of these services. And these are just some of the things that we do. The other side of it is, as it relates to the other 4 pillars of the National ICT Blueprint. So one area that we were particularly focused on over the last 2 years or so has been that of capacity building, and that's where the HackTT concept came from. Because it's one thing to build out our internal infrastructure to allow government agencies to interact using those infrastructural services, email, etc. It's another thing to now re-engineer the processes to get people to rethink how they do things so that you can, I would say reinvent, but change the way that you deploy digital services. And that was one of the things that we were looking at in this HackTT pilot. It was really just to get the people talking, to understand that you don't try to take the paper process and put it on ICT. That's not going to make sense. That's one side of it. So, it's a multifaceted role in that regard. So, it's not about, let's say, necessarily putting a laptop for a student, let's say, that's an example that I hear a lot about now. But what it is about assisting those as it relates to putting a laptop forward for the students. What are the standards you should use for the laptops? Are you making sure that you have the proper user requirements specified? Do you have you considered some of those things? Have you considered leveraging strategic partnerships or such? Have you the necessary backing to effect the procurement process in a clean, transparent manner that is beyond contestation? Those are where the activities are. But I dare say that, unfortunately, sometimes a company with circa, I'd say 100 employees or so, we are tasked to do many things, and that is for the greater good. Sometimes you just have to do it, because if you don't do it, it's difficult to move to the next step. And if we didn't do those things, then you wouldn't be seeing things like TT commute coming up. You wouldn't see things like employee TT, our government payment, the chatbot solutions that are being used right now, assisting and participating in various awareness and stakeholder processes. For instance, the ICT roundtable discussions that we had at the height of the pandemic, and just providing general awareness and support to various people through symposia and so on. So that is it. I think the biggest challenge, however, is that our prime customer is really government, but the things that government do affects the citizens and the businesses, the other stakeholders. So I think that's where a lot of the blurring happens. How much of our role in awareness should focus on the citizen-facing, the business-facing, the MDA-facing awareness? And I believe that is something that we have to work a little bit more on, and I know that we are working on it, so that a lot of these blurred lines hopefully with time should be clarified more.
Great. Thanks for that, Sean. Moving on that and allowing others to come into the conversation, let me just hand over to Maria. You have a contribution here?
Well, I want to just take this back a little bit, right? And it's a study that we did a couple of years ago on digital governance and where the board comes in and why some things aren't being done. And I want to put it in the context of part of what Sean said there in the end with the awareness. But he's talking about awareness at this level. Let's start with the knowledge at this level. Where there's lack of knowledge, there is fear. And when there's fear, people don't want to do things. So the first thing we have to ensure is that decision makers understand. They don't have to write a program, but they have to understand how technology works and how it can really make the transformation happen. But when you have people sitting down making a decision and seeing lots of chat here about young people, when I have training now or I have discussions, my lowest level staff are involved because they know more about the technology than I do. They know what's happening out there and their contribution is significant. So we need to widen the diversification of the brain that goes into the decision making. We have to ensure that people who are making the decisions have been educated themselves to understand. You can't have a vision if you don't even know what's out there. To understand that if we know what exists, or if we understand what exists, then that helps us build a vision and even executing it. So I'm seeing everybody here talking about the under 30s, etc. 3/4 of my staff are 25 years old. And they sit at the dinner table and they get to share. Sometimes they don't have the experience, and I'll say, okay, guys, 50 years old, does have some value still, and this is why. So I think when we're talking about awareness, it goes two ways, and I think broadening the minds that sit at the decision-making table is important if we really want to see transformation.
Sanjay?
Thanks, Danny. Thanks, Maria. Thanks for that contribution. Well, let me hand it back over to you, Danny, with this question. And this is a question really that piggybacks off of what Sean said, what Maria said in terms of that broadening the scope. So what do we need to do in order to make that happen? So it's very calculated. What would be our next steps?
I don't want to take up the floor too much and comment, but I noticed, I'll just jump in very quickly. I'll make it quick this time. I think we need to dialogue. That's really it. We need to have an opportunity to facilitate discussion and hear the points and really come to some sort of understanding. I think that is probably in a nutshell what we should be doing as the immediate next step.
But also to support what Maria said, we need to be willing to dialogue. And sometimes, and this is both the public and private sector, so it's no one more than the other, you don't have sufficient will to actually have that dialogue. And in fact, for some people, it's easier to actually not entertain the dialogue because they feel it's too painful because it's not the area of expertise. But let's hear from Peter.
Yeah, I was just gonna, I have to say something now because, I heard what Sean said just recently, what you just said, and I'm sorry to say this, but talk is cheap. It's time for somebody to come up with the Benjamins. And I'm going to tell you, I've seen so many failed digital transformation projects in the last few years. And it's because, and George Gobin will love this, there's a lot of technical debt out there, right? And I have clients who are trying now to use the latest and greatest products, yet they still have Windows 2000 Server or Windows 2008 Service Pack 1. So there's all this technical debt. We have to address the technical debt and spend some money doing that. We have to spend money on educating people. We have to spend money on awareness. We have to spend money. It's all about money. Talk is cheap. I think the time for talk is long past and you need to do something. And I just wanted to circle back to Albert Daniel's comment about burnout. There's no question there's a lot of burnout. And you see that in a lot of these digital transformation projects where they're given unrealistic deadlines of like 18 months to put in all this new technology. But I just want to mention in Canada today, we call it Mental Health Day in Canada today. And anybody who texts and uses any of the Bell services, Bell will donate 5 cents to the mental health because there is a serious mental health crisis going on in the world right now.
Good. Sanjay, any other questions?
Yes, I do. I have another question here. I'm going to thank Denise Aliong Thomas for this question. And her question to everyone is, who is going to conduct a needs analysis of each sector? See you smiling, Danny. Perhaps you want to...
No, I have comments, but I'll leave it up to the panel to respond.
So, sorry, what was the question?
The question, Peter, is from Denise Aliong Thomas.
Yep.
Who is going to conduct a needs analysis of the sectors?
Well, again, I think we understand the needs. I don't think you need more paperwork. I've done a lot of work for governments. What happens is they get the report and they put it on the shelf, and then 2 years later somebody comes back and does the same thing, and they put that on the shelf beside the other one. I think the time is now. You need to act. And I thought you were asking another question, which was, how are we going to come up with the money? Well, you heard Maria talk about some places that have had fantastic success, like Singapore, and we could pick on Dubai and countries like that, who have decided to invest for the future. And so your country as a whole has to invest for the future. They have to do things that incentivizes, to use that word that many have, in innovation in companies and in your society. And you can't do it as individuals or as individual companies. You have to do it as a society. You have to decide this is what we want to be. We want to be leaders, not followers.
Yeah, but it's more important, what do you invest in?
Yes.
So I mean, if you think of how budgets are spent, okay, and it goes back to the whole question around, are we spending it on the right things? Have we really spent the time to understand the root cause of why we say the same things every year over and over? And unless you actually solve a root cause, then you never come out of the pain that you were suffering in the first place, right? So, it's just like, all the analogies with the doctor and your body and stuff. If it's the wrong body part you are fixing, then you're never going to be healthy. So, yeah, needs analysis. I mean, the amount of consulting, and I'm a consultant, the amount of consulting reports that have been done, I'm sure we will have a whole library filled. But then what do people do with it? Right? I mean, if you look at Singapore, right? Lee Kuan Yew was a benevolent dictator, but he has died and his policies have remained. That's when you know you have real leadership. It's when you are gone, what you have implemented continues. So what is the root cause? Could be our politics, but we won't go there. So maybe what we need is some 30 and 40-year-olds to get together and start to lead the change. So the truth is, we do have budgets. Our budget is not a small budget, but we don't look at what is the root cause and where this money really needs to go. Somebody just said egos, and that's it. If you have a room of egos, the only thing is a bigger ego and no action.
Yeah. So can I just to jump on something Maria said? I mean, it's so true. It's that, and to go back to what Sean said, if you want to focus on anything in education, Sean, at any level, you got to start teaching critical thinking, because I think there's a serious problem with critical thinking.
Point on.
But to go back to one of the reasons that Singapore is so wildly successful is the mindset of the country, right? They get it. I mean, I remember I was struck one time when I was in Singapore and I went into a Chinese restaurant, and what they had is they had little icons there, and each one of the and this is very low tech, but very, very high utility kind of thing. So they had an icon that was a chicken, pork or pig, and a cow, right? And then they were different colors, right? So the different colors. So if you get a red pig, that meant that you wanted noodles and pork. If you got a green pig, that meant you wanted rice and corn, right? So even in their low tech solutions, they're very, very high tech in a way, right? And so you need to start adopting that kind of mentality if you want to move forward and compete in today's world.
Because there was vision. There was one man who had a great vision, and he thought about it in every little detail. And you hit it right there on the head. Our education creates people who just want to do what was done before, memorize a definition, but they don't know what the definition really means. I see it in the workplace here all the time. But Maria, the Excel spreadsheet, I say, I don't care what the Excel spreadsheet have, it makes no sense. Common sense, unless we teach people how to critically think. And again, look, we get in the root cause. One of the root causes is our education system. And unless that is changed and we make innovation like math and English, then we're never going to see innovation continuing past our days. It has to become part of the culture.
Absolutely. And one of the challenges we have, and this is taking a dig on government, is our government is steeped in traditional ways of doing things. And their perspective is they want an immediate return. So I'm actually going to spend or invest in this particular sector. Within a year, I want to see a return on it. It's not like that. If you actually invest in technology, it's actually going to be a long-term investment. You are going to see some short-term wins and so on, but the payback is in the long term. Case in point, Singapore. Singapore didn't happen overnight. It took decades for them to get where they are today. But our government right now is very much a traditional approach to actually their operations. Well, hence the reason why we don't have financial management, an integrated computerized financial management system in our government as of today. For hopefully that will change soon. But we actually are so comfortable where we are that it takes a lot of, let's say, something significant like COVID to try and jolt us off out of what was the normal then into a new normal. Okay, Sanjay, and come on, run some more questions.
Well, Danny, we have a lot of comments. There's a lot of subscription to the critical thinking, and while everybody's
Absolutely.
subscribed to that, the key bit here is making that transformation to ensuring that that is now manifested into the actions that we take. And this goes back to the point that Maria mentioned before, broadening that scope. So the critical thinking needs to come at all levels. And there's some measure for accountability and transparency, which has been highlighted as perhaps areas that we need to pay a little more attention to. So I wouldn't want to go too much into some of the comments, mindful of time. So what I want to suggest, Danny, is perhaps you invite our panelists to make some closing remarks based on the discussions we've had here, so that we can ensure that we remain on time. We've got 10 more minutes.
Sure. And probably what I can ask as a final question to lead into the candidates, the panelists making their closing remarks. How can we determine effective regulation in a digital world using this multi-stakeholder approach? And it brings it back to the topic, and it actually will encompass some of your closing comments. So any one of the panelists to go first?
Sean, you go.
Okay. I don't know. I thought it was ladies first, but it's
Well,
all
I
right.
could go ladies
no,
first.
no.
I'll be short and sweet.
Oh God. So you want me to take up the 10 minutes and leave you with right? Danny, just repeat the question again, just because I just want to make sure I clearly answer exactly what it is you are asking again, please, and for the benefit of one or two people who just messaged us that you repeated they had a break.
Okay, sorry. How can we determine effective regulation of the digital world adopting this multi-stakeholder approach?
All right. So I think one of the key things, and I mean, I said this before in many different fora, and I know that it will be a growing concern. And it's not because of lack of progress. It's because even if you attain what you attain, things change. And that's sort of the premise behind a vision. It's kind of over the horizon. So I think that governance is key. Governance as it relates to who are the stakeholders, what are their roles, what are we trying to accomplish, how are we going to accomplish it? In a nutshell, I believe that is key. I've taken on board a lot of the comments, and I enjoyed the conversations so far. But one thing that I want to suggest as well is that communication, that communication has to always be there. To me, whether it's the same message or not, that should tell you something. If it's the same message, ask yourself the question, why is it the same message? Why is it perceived that the wheel is being reinvented as opposed to maybe getting some refurbishment, for instance? I think that speaks volumes to one of the critical elements that needs to be had. So in general terms, clear and effective communications are key to the multi-stakeholder approach, as is the governance process, the governance that specifies the process and the interactions and the interfaces between the different agents.
Good. So Maria, you ready?
Well, the first thing I would say about the regulations is let's not take 5 to 10 years to get it done, because by the time it's done, it's already outdated. So a law that was drafted in 2006 get passed in 2018, 2020. What happens is it's already outdated. So when we're talking about this whole stakeholder approach, it's not just about the content, but also having people to push it forward. And, you know, somebody mentioned earlier that we have to be the actions of change. So we are the ones, private and public sector, every citizen has to come forward and say, this is the better for me. We go on Facebook to talk about all kind of foolishness in this country. But instead, why don't we push for the things that need to be done to help the transformation? That's our role. We have to be the activists. We have to be the ones that says, this education system is not working for us. We have to push the change, but we all are very complacent. So I think for me, my little pet peeve with the regulations is let's not take 5 and 10 years to pass it. We need to be more agile. We need to push things forward, and we need to do it now. So my message is, now is a great place to start. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, as Sean said. All we need to do, and we don't need to copy exactly what was done that does not suit our environment, right? We are different. Our makeup is different. Our size is different. What we need to do is look at what works best for our environment and just do it.
Good, and we don't necessarily need to reinvent what has been successful elsewhere once it's actually applicable to our environment.
Applicable, exactly.
Yeah. And Peter?
So, you know, as I've listened to this discussion and the things that are coming out of our mouths, I'm struck by a few things. And one is you know, yes, the governments in most locations are putting things online, but I don't consider that a transformational act, if you want. Exactly. The government has to re-engineer itself and to consider what is its vision for serving the people that, you know, of the countries that you and I are both in. Because if we keep doing, I think it was Albert Einstein, you know, doing the same thing and expecting different results is the definition of insanity. So if we keep doing the same thing over and over again and then wondering why we're getting the same results, like we're asking for the same results. And I just want to add what you said and Danny said, or sorry, what Danny said and Maria said, was that at the end of the day, it comes down to leadership. And it comes down to, as I said before, it comes down to the Benjamins. Somebody has to cough up some money, right? And I think about, I'm often thought when we have these kinds of discussions, I don't know if you've ever heard the old joke about commitment and involvement. And think about your breakfast, okay? So you're having bacon and eggs. Well, the chicken was involved, but the pig was committed. We need commitment, okay? And usually commitment is demonstrated by money.
Good. Well, folks, I actually have to thank this panel for the wonderful deliberations. There's so much more to be said, and I have pages of notes as we were talking, but I have to understand that I am a moderator, I'm not a panelist. There's so much I can say. And a lot of things that you've said, Peter, that relates to the Canadian environment actually exist in Trinidad, but we are not effective at using or utilizing these mechanisms that exist. Yes, it takes too long to pass legislation and thereafter put in place the required regulation. The world doesn't stop turning. We have to appreciate that. So to Peter, Maria, and Sean, thank you very much for your contributions this morning. As I said, a lot of what we are seeing here is opening the doors for the other panelists to actually start addressing specific items. And our next session is really related to cybersecurity, which will be conducted by George Gobin, who is actually gaining a name for himself in advocacy for cybersecurity, not only in Trinidad, but within the region. Thanks very much to the panelists, and you all have been gracious enough to join us in this important IGF. And I'll relate a point that Albert made. We talked about ICANN and the multi-stakeholder approach. And having attended a few of the ICANN annual sessions and so on, I am amazed that the approach works, but it does. So we have to bear in mind, there are successful entities that actually have adopted the multi-stakeholder approach and are actually succeeding with it. The Internet Society is one, ICANN is another one. Let's learn from them and move forward. So thank you very much. Peter,
You're welcome.
Maria, Sean, and we look forward to ongoing discussions with you all at some other forum or otherwise. So I'll hand it back to Demis, you the event coordinator. I think we have a brief bio break at this point in time.